Long before Roman soldiers set foot on British soil, Britain was already connected to the Roman world. For nearly a century after Julius Caesar's expeditions in the year 55 and 54 BC, the tribes of Britain had traded, negotiated, and dealt with Rome from across the sea. Roman goods, coins, customs, and influence slowly reached the island, especially in the south, where powerful tribal leaders began to build relationships with the empire. But Britain was not yet a Roman province. There were no Roman legions stationed there, no Roman governors ruling the land, and no great army of occupation. Instead, Rome's power was felt through diplomacy, tribute, hostages, and friendly kings who depended on Roman support. It was a delicate balance. Britain remained independent, but Rome was never far away. Several emperors thought about changing that. Augustus planned invasions more than once, but each time, events elsewhere in the empire forced him to abandon the idea. For the moment, Rome found it more useful to influence Britain from a distance than to conquer it outright. By the 40s AD, however, Britain was becoming unstable. This gave the Emperor Claudius exactly what he needed, a reason to invade. A few years earlier, Caligula had gathered troops on the coast facing Britain. Though his campaign ended in confusion and never crossed the channel, the preparations he left behind, the soldiers, the ships, the supplies, and even a lighthouse at Boulogne, helped make their later invasion possible. So when Claudius came to power, Britain was no longer just a distant island of trade and diplomacy. It had become a land of opportunity, rivalry, and political crisis. As for Rome, that crisis opened the door to conquest. In the year 43 AD, the Emperor Claudius finally turned Rome's attention fully toward Britain. The official reason for the invasion was simple. Rome claimed it was coming to restore Verrica, the exiled king of the Atrebates, to his throne. Verrica had been driven out by his enemies in Britain and had appealed to Rome for help. For Claudius, this was the perfect excuse. What looked like an act of protection was in truth the beginning of conquest. The invasion was placed under the command of Aulus Plautius, an experienced Roman senator and general. Under him came a powerful army made up of legionaries and supporting troops from across the empire. Roman armies were often flexible, with units moved from place to place as needed, so the full picture is difficult to know with certainty. What is clear is that this was no small raid or show of strength. Claudius had sent one of the most serious military expeditions Rome ever launched against Britain. Behind it stood ambition, politics, and the desire for glory. The first great resistance to Rome was led by two brothers, Togodumnus and Caratacus, the son of the former Cativalunian king. They knew what was at stake. If Rome broke their power, the south of Britain would fall. So they gathered a large force and moved to stop the invaders before they could push deeper inland. The two armies met at a river crossing, probably near modern Rochester on the River Medway. There, the Britons made their stand. The battle was fierce and lasted for 2 days. Roman soldiers fought to force their way across the water, while the British warriors tried to hold them back from the far bank. The Romans also used their auxiliary troops to great effect. Some Batvian soldiers, famous for their ability to swim rivers in full equipment, crossed the Medway separately and struck the Britons from an unexpected direction. Slowly, the British line began to break. Defeated at the Medway, the Britons retreated toward the Thames. The Romans followed them, crossing into the marshy lands of Essex, where the difficult ground cost them men, but the advance did not stop. Soon after the fighting near the Thames, Togodumnus died. His death was a heavy blow to the British resistance. Aulus Plautius, the Roman commander, then halted the army and sent for Emperor Claudius himself. Claudius came to Britain to claim the glory of victory. By the time he arrived, the hardest fighting had already been done. The Cativaluni were weakened, their leaders divided, and their capital lay within reach. Claudius marched with the army for the final stage of the campaign, receiving the surrender of several British kings along the way. For Rome, this was a moment of triumph, but the conquest was not truly over. Caratacus escaped with his family, followers, and treasure. He fled west, beyond the reach of Rome's first victory, determined to continue the fight. While some British rulers submitted and were rewarded, others prepared for years of resistance. After the first Roman victories in the southeast, the conquest of Britain began to spread. Vespasian, one of Rome's most capable commanders, led his forces westward. Town after town and stronghold after stronghold fell before him. He subdued local tribes, captured fortified settlements, and pushed Roman power deeper into the island. His campaign reached as far as Exeter, which later became an important base for the Second Augusta Legion. At the same time, other Roman forces moved north. The 9th Hispania was sent toward the region of Lincoln, helping to secure the eastern side of the conquest. Then, in the year 47 AD, a new governor arrived, Publius Ostorius Scapula. He turned his attention toward the west, where the tribes of Wales and borderlands were proving far harder to defeat. Among the fiercest enemies of Rome were the Silures of southeast Wales. They knew their country well. Its hills, forests, and rough ground made it perfect for ambushes and sudden attacks. Under the leadership of Caratacus, they fought a bitter guerrilla war against the invaders. Caratacus had escaped after the fall of the southeast, but he had not surrendered. In Wales, he became the symbol of continued resistance. For years, he struck at the Romans from difficult terrain, refusing to let them turn conquest into peace. Eventually, however, Caratacus chose to risk everything in open battle. It was a decision that cost him dearly. The Romans defeated him, and he fled north to the Brigantes, a powerful tribe. Their queen, however, had made her own peace with Rome. Either unable or unwilling to protect him, she handed Caratacus over to the invaders. With Caratacus captured, one of Britain's great resistance leaders was gone, but the west was still not fully conquered. When Nero became emperor in the year 54 AD, a new campaign began. He appointed new governors who were more willing to push into the west. Roman armies advanced and struck at Anglesey, a sacred island and a centre of Druidic power. The attack on Anglesey was brutal and symbolic. Rome was not only fighting warriors now, it was trying to break the spiritual heart of resistance. But before Wales could be brought fully under Roman control, disaster erupted in the southeast. In the year 60 or 61 AD, Boudicca rose in rebellion, and the Roman army was forced to turn back. The conquest of Wales would have to wait. In the east of Britain, the Iceni had once been allies of Rome. Their king had tried to protect his people by leaving his kingdom jointly to his daughters and to the emperor. But when he died, Rome ignored his wishes. Roman officials treated the Iceni not as allies, but as conquered people. Their lands were seized, their nobles were humiliated, and their royal family was brutalized. The king's widow Boudicca was flogged, and her daughters were abused. It was an insult meant to break them. Instead, it lit a fire. Boudicca rose in rebellion, and thousands joined her. The rebels struck at Camulodunum. The city was poorly defended, and the Roman veterans living there were overwhelmed. Temples, houses, and streets were consumed by fire. The colony was destroyed. Then Boudicca's army moved to Londinium, a growing Roman trading town. The Roman governor knew he could not save it. He abandoned the settlement and those who remained were slaughtered. Londinium was then burned. For a moment, Roman Britain seemed close to collapse. Great settlements had been destroyed, and the rebellion had become the greatest crisis Rome had faced on the island. But Suetonius gathered his forces and chose his ground carefully. Though badly outnumbered, the Romans were disciplined, heavily armed, and trained for exactly this kind of fight. Boadicea's warriors came in vast numbers, but passion alone could not break the Roman line. In the final battle, the legions held firm. They waited, advanced, and cut through the rebel army with brutal efficiency. The revolt was crushed. Boadicea did not fall into Roman hands. According to tradition, she died soon after, perhaps by poison, choosing death over capture. Her rebellion failed, but her name survived. Boadicea became more than a defeated queen. She became the memory of a Britain that fought back, fierce, wounded, and unwilling to kneel quietly before Rome. After Boadicea's rebellion had been crushed, Rome returned to the slow work of conquest. The south and east were now firmly under Roman control, but the north remained uncertain. There, the most powerful people were the Brigantes, a great tribal confederation whose lands stretched across much of northern Britain. For a time, Rome had avoided a full war with them. Their queen had been a useful ally. Years earlier, she handed Caratacus over to the Romans, proving where her loyalties lay. But her rule was troubled. Her former husband, Venucius, turned against her and raised a rebellion. In the year 69 AD, the queen Cartimandua could no longer hold on. She called on Rome for help. Roman forces rescued her, but they did not restore her power. Instead, Venucius was left in control. To Rome this was dangerous. A friendly queen had been removed, and a hostile ruler now controlled one of the largest tribal powers in Britain. The balance in the north had changed, and Rome now had the excuse it needed to move against the Brigantes. Roman power advanced from several directions. In the east, they pushed forward with the 9th Legion. In the west, other forces moved through the river valleys and mountain passes of northern England. Forts were built, roads were laid out, and military camps appeared across the landscape. The Romans were not simply marching through the north, they were locking it down. Carlisle became one of the key strongholds of this advance. Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who would later become one of the most famous governors of Roman Britain, also played a role during these campaigns. As commander of the 12th Legion, he helped drive Roman power through the western routes. The strategy was careful and powerful. Roman forces moved through valleys, across passes, and along the coast. They built forts at key points, watched the roads, controlled the rivers, and cut through the tribal heartlands. By the early 70s AD, the Romans were no longer just holding the south of Britain, they were pushing deep into the north. The conquest of Britain had entered a new phase. Rome was no longer content to rule from the south, it was reaching for the whole island. By the late 70s AD, Rome had pushed far beyond the first lands it had conquered in Britain, but the island was not still fully under Roman control. When Agricola became governor, he set out to finish what earlier commanders had begun. He used both force and diplomacy. Some tribes were defeated in battle, others were persuaded to accept Roman rule through negotiation, pressure, and the promise of peace. Once an area had been brought under control, Agricola made sure Rome could keep it. He built forts across the newly conquered territories, placing soldiers where rebellion was most likely to begin. These forts were not just defensive posts, they were signs of Roman power, built to watch roads, guard valleys, and remind the local people who now ruled the land. In 80 AD, Agricola marched north into what is now Scotland. His army pushed through the lowlands and reached deep into the country. He did not rush back south. Instead, he spent time securing what had been taken, strengthening his position, and tightening Rome's grip on the lands behind him. Then Agricola went further. He used both the army and fleet, moving along the coasts and striking into northern Britain from land and sea. Roman ships shadowed the advance, carrying supplies, scouting the shoreline, and showing the tribes of the north that Rome could reach them even beyond the roads. The greatest test came at the Battle of Mons Grappius. There, the northern tribes gathered under a leader named Caligacus. They faced Agricola in a final attempt to stop the Roman advance, but the Roman army was too disciplined, too experienced, and too well organized. The battle ended in a decisive Roman victory. For a moment, it seemed as if Rome might conquer the whole island. After the victory, Agricola continued to secure the north with forts, roads, and military camps. In southern Scotland, forts appeared across important tribal lands, turning the region into a guarded military zone. Some areas were heavily occupied, while others seemed to have been left alone, perhaps because their people had made peace with Rome and were not seen as an imminent threat. But Agricola's time in Britain did not last. In the year 84 AD, he was recalled to Rome. He had taken Roman power farther north than ever before. He had defeated several tribes, built roads and forts across the frontier, and brought Rome close to the edge of total conquest. Yet the final step was never taken. Agricola left Britain before the island could be fully subdued, and the far north became beyond Rome's lasting control. After Agricola left Britain, Rome's advance into the far north began to fade. The governors who came after him are not named in the surviving records, but one thing is clear: they did not continue his great push. Whether they lacked the will, the soldiers, or the support from Rome, the result was the same. The dream of conquering all of Britain was quietly set aside. The signs of retreat soon appeared. The reason was simple. The far north was hard country. Its people were difficult to subdue. Its land offered little reward, and any war there could drag on for years. For Rome, the cost of holding it may have been greater than anything the region could give back. So the Romans changed their plan. Rather than push endlessly north, they chose to strengthen what they already controlled. When Hadrian became emperor, Rome's policy in Britain changed once again. Instead of pushing endlessly north, Hadrian chose to secure the province behind a strong and permanent frontier. In around the year 122 AD, work began on Hadrian's wall, stretching across northern Britain. It was more than just a wall. It was a statement. Rome had decided where its world would end. For a generation, Hadrian's wall marked the edge of Roman Britain. But after Hadrian's death, the new emperor Antoninus wanted to show that Rome was still advancing. He was not content to simply defend the frontier he had inherited. He wanted victory, glory, and a new line farther north. The emperor ordered the governor of Britain to march beyond Hadrian's wall. By the year 142 AD, the Romans had pushed the frontier all the way to the line between the Firth of Forth and the Firth of Clyde. There they built a new barrier, the Antonine Wall. It was shorter than Hadrian's Wall, but it stood much farther north. For the emperor, it was proof that the empire could still conquer and could still expand. But the new frontier did not last. By the year 162 AD, the wall was abandoned and Roman forces withdrew once more to Hadrian's Wall. The older frontier was stronger, easier to defend, and better suited to the long-term control of Britain. Even after this, Roman armies still marched deep into Scotland several times. They built temporary camps, launched campaigns, and tried again and again to break the power of the northern tribes. But the pattern remained the same. Rome could invade far north, it could win battles there, it could build forts, roads and walls, but it could not hold the far north forever. One of the last great Roman attempts to conquer the far north came in the year 209 AD, under the Emperor Septimus Severus. By this time, Rome had ruled much of Britain for more than 150 years. Hadrian's Wall still marked the strongest frontier of the province, but beyond it, the northern tribes remained unconquered. Severus claimed that the northern tribes had provoked him. In response, he gathered a massive army and marched beyond Hadrian's Wall. However, the Caledonians avoided the kind of open battle Rome preferred. Instead, they used the land itself as a weapon. They struck suddenly, disappeared into difficult terrain, cut off supplies, and wore the Romans down. The deeper Severus pushed, the more costly the campaign became. Ancient sources claim that Roman losses were enormous. Whether the number is exact or exaggerated, the meaning is clear. Rome paid heavily for every mile it gained. Severus fought brutally, and the northern tribes suffered terribly. Villages were attacked, lands were devastated, and the campaign left deep scars. Yet, even with all the power of the empire behind him, Severus could not turn Caledonia into a secure Roman province. In the end, he withdrew back to Hadrian's Wall. Severus planned to renew the war, but he never had the chance. In the year 211 AD, he died at York. His son Caracalla abandoned the campaign and made peace. Later emperors would still send armies beyond the wall, but the age of great conquest was fading. Rome still watched the north. It still tried to influence the tribes beyond the wall with diplomacy, payments, threats, and occasional force. Christianity would eventually spread through these borderlands as well. Yet the final truth remained unchanged. The Romans had conquered much of Britain, but the far north never truly became theirs. Roman rule changed Britain forever. It brought roads, towns, forts, markets, baths, temples, and a new way of organising life. Latin entered government and trade. Roman law shaped local rule, and Britain became tied to a much wider world of soldiers, merchants, officials, and ideas. But Roman influence was never the same everywhere. In the towns and lowlands, life became deeply Romanized, while in the countryside and the far north, older British traditions survived. The result was not the end of Britain's past, but the beginning of a new mixed world, part native, part Roman, and unlike anything the island had known before. From the mists of the 5th century rise the names Hengist and Horsa, legendary figures of the Germanic world. According to the great traditions of early England, these brothers led the Angles, Saxons and Jutes, the ancestral peoples of the modern English race, across the sea in their fateful arrival upon the shores of Britain. In the old tales, Hengist stands as the founding father of the Kingdom of Kent. Yet legend and history blur. Some scholars believe Hengist and Horsa were not men of flesh and blood, but echoes of an older myth. For many Germanic peoples, they revered a sacred pair of divine twin brothers, and still, their names endure, woven into the earliest chronicles of England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the history of the Britons, Bede's history of the English people, and the history of the kings of Britain. In Old English, their names carry a deeper meaning, Hengist meaning the stallion, and Horsa meaning the horse, symbols of power, conquest, and destiny. Whether myth or memory, their legend gallops through the birth of England itself. This is their story. The lineage of Hengist and Horsa is not drawn from a single source, but from many voices across centuries, each preserving a fragment of legend, history, and belief. Our first witness is Bede, the great 8th century monk and historian. Writing in his History of the English People, Bede sought to record the origins of the English with scholarly care, yet even he preserved the ancient royal tradition. According to Bede, Hengist and Horsa were the sons of Witgils, son of Witta, son of Wector, and ultimately the descendants of Woden, the chief god of the Germanic world. For early Anglo-Saxon kings, this divine ancestry was no metaphor, it was the source of their authority, their right to rule. A later and more expansive genealogy appears in the 9th century History of the Britons. This work traces the brothers' bloodline even deeper into the past. Here, Hengist and Horsa are named as the son of Gwitglis, the son of Gwicta, the son of Gwechta, son of Vuden, son of Friololf, son of Fredolf, son of Finn, son of Folegwilad, and finally Geta. Of Geta, the text makes a pointed claim. He was said to be the son of a god, not the almighty god of Christianity, but a pagan deity, an idol worshipped by the heathen. The author, writing through a Christian lens, condemns this lineage as demonic deception, even while preserving it for history. Centuries later, the tradition resurfaces in the north. The Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson mentions Hengist in the prologue to his Prose Edda. Snorri presents a history of the Germanic gods, portraying them not as divine beings, but as mighty kings of antiquity, whose deeds later were transformed into myth. In his account, Woden appoints 3 of his sons to rule Saxony. Eastern Saxony is given to Vegdeg, whose son Witgils fathers Witta, and from Witta is born Hengist, a man standing at the threshold between legend and recorded history. Taken together, these sources reveal more than ancestry. They show how early medieval peoples understood power, origin, and destiny, whether remembered as warriors, kings, or echoes of forgotten gods. Hengist and Horsa emerge not merely as men, but as symbols of a world where myth and history rode side by side. The 9th century History of the Britons, traditionally attributed to the British writer Nennius, tells of how the fate of Britain changed forever during the reign of King Vortigern, king of the Britons. In those days, 3 ships arrived from across the sea, carrying exiles from Germany. They were led by the brothers Hengist and Horsa. In the year 447, Vortigern welcomed them as allies and granted them the Isle of Thanet, allowing them to settle there as friends. For a time, the Saxons lived peacefully on the island. Vortigern promised them food, clothing, and supplies in return for their help in fighting Britain's enemies. But as more Saxons arrived, their numbers grew too great, and the Britons could no longer keep their promise. Vortigern then told them their service was no longer needed, and asked them to return home. Instead, Vortigern allowed Hengist to send for reinforcements. Messengers were dispatched to distant lands called Scythia, where warriors were chosen and sent to Britain aboard 16 ships. With them came Hengist's daughter, renowned for her beauty. Hengist soon prepared a great feast, and invited Vortigern, his officers, and Ceretic, his interpreter. Before the feast began, Hengist instructed his daughter to serve the guests generous amounts of wine and ale, so that they would drink deeply. As the night wore on, Vortigern became enchanted by her. Overcome with desire, he promised Hengist whatever he wished in exchange for her hand in marriage. After consulting the elders of his people, Hengist asked for Kent. Unaware that Kent already had a ruler, Vortigern agreed. Vortigern took Hengist's daughter as his wife and loved her deeply. Hengist then told the king that he would be both his advisor and protector, boasting that his people were strong, fierce, and born for war. With Vortigern's permission, Hengist summoned his son Ochta and his brother Abissa to fight against the Scots, and the peoples beyond the northern wall. They arrived with 40 ships, sailed around the land of the Picts, conquered many regions, and even attacked the Orkney Islands. More and more Saxons followed, until entire lands were emptied of their former inhabitants. Meanwhile, Vortigern fell into disgrace. He angered Germanus, the bishop of Auxerre, by marrying his own daughter and fathering a child by her. Fearing judgment, Vortigern went into hiding on advice of his council. At last, his son Vortimer rose against the Saxons. He led the Britons into battle against Hengist and Horsa, driving them back into Thanet and trapping them there. The war raged back and forth. Vortimer fought 4 great battles, first at Thanet, then at the river Derwent, then at Epsford, where Horsa and Vortigern's other son Catigern were both killed, and finally near the shores of the Gallic Sea, where the Saxons were defeated and forced to flee to their ships. But after a short time, Vortimer died. With his death, the Saxons returned stronger than before, aided by pagan allies from overseas. Hengist gathered his forces and sent an offer of peace to Vortigern. Desperate, the king accepted. Hengist then arranged another feast, inviting both British and Saxon leaders. Secretly, he ordered his men to hide knives beneath their feet. At the signal, Hengist cried out, "Nima der Sexa," "Take your knives." In an instant, the Saxons slaughtered the unarmed Britons. Only Vortigern was spared. He bought his life by surrendering Essex, Sussex, Middlesex, and the other lands to the Saxons. The Saxons continued to grow in strength and number, and when Hengist finally died, his son Ochta rose to take his place, ensuring that the Saxon hold on Britain would endure. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, preserved in 9 manuscripts written between the 9th and 12th centuries, offers another powerful account of how Hengist and Horsa came to Britain, and how their arrival changed the land forever. According to the Chronicle, in the year 449, King Vortigern invited Hengist and Horsa to Britain to help defend the realm against attacks from the Picts. The brothers landed at Ebbsfleet, and wherever they met the enemy, they drove the Picts back in battle. After these victories, Hengist and Horsa sent messages across the sea to their homeland in Germany. They spoke of the weakness of the Britons and the great wealth and fertility of the land. They asked for reinforcements, and their call was answered. Soon more warriors and settlers began to arrive. These newcomers came from 3 great Germanic peoples, the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes. Over time, they spread across Britain. The Saxons settled in Essex, Sussex, and Wessex. The Jutes took Kent, the Isle of Wight, and parts of Hampshire. The Angles claimed East Anglia, Mercia, and Northumbria, abandoning their old homeland of Angelun, which was left empty behind them. The Chronicle continues its account of war and conquest. In the year 455, Hengist and Horsa fought against Vortigern at the Battle of Aylesford. Horsa was killed in the fighting, but Hengist survived and took control of the kingdom alongside his son Esk. 2 years later, in the year 457, Hengist and Esk faced the Britons again at Crayford, where they killed 4,000 men. The surviving Britons fled Kent entirely. In the year 465, Hengist and Esk fought yet another battle, this time at Ebbsfleet. There, they killed 12 British leaders, further breaking resistance. The final mention of Hengist in the Chronicle comes in the year 473. By then, Hengist and Esk are said to have taken immense treasure, while the Britons are described as fleeing before the English like fire. With these words, the Chronicle marks the end of an age and the rise of another. Hengist and Horsa stand foremost among the leaders of the Anglo-Saxon arrival in Britain. While the origins of many early founders are wrapped in doubtful tales and fading memory, the names Hengist and Horsa endure. Their story is not merely legend, but one recorded and echoed in the oldest texts, preserved by chroniclers who believed their deeds shaped the birth of England. Hengist is said to have founded the Kingdom of Kent, and after his death, the throne passed to his son Esk, also known as Oisc, from whom arose the royal house known as the Oiscingas. This dynasty would rule Kent for centuries. The most renowned descendant of Hengist was King Ethelbert of Kent, celebrated as a Bretwalda, a ruler acknowledged as overlord of much of Britain. Ethelbert was also the first Anglo-Saxon king to embrace Christianity. Under Ethelbert's rule, Kent stood as the most powerful kingdom in England, its prestige rooted in both conquest and sacred kingship, and in the legacy of its legendary founder. Yet, as the centuries passed, the power of Hengist's line slowly waned. By the 8th century, Kent had fallen beneath the dominance of Mercia, ruled by Offa, one of the greatest and most formidable Anglo-Saxon kings. Ethelbert II is the last well-documented king of Kent, who can be securely placed within the lineage of Hengist. Mercian authority did not last forever. In the year 825, Mercia was shattered by Wessex at the Battle of Ellendon, and the Mercian client King Baldred was driven from Kent. From this moment, Kent passed under West Saxon control. At the heart of this turning point stands King Egbert, named in many sources as the King of Wessex, Essex, and Kent. His father is traditionally identified as Ealhmund, the King of Kent, raising a profound and tantalizing question. If the direct line of Hengist was never truly broken, then the blood of Hengist, leader of the Great Migration, may have mingled with the blood of Cerdic, founder of the West Saxon royal house. There may be subtle signs of this union. Egbert's son Ethelwulf named his eldest son Ethelstan King of Kent, where he reigned until the year 851. Was this a deliberate echo of an older Kentish tradition, preserved within the bloodline? By then, this single house ruled Wessex, Kent, Surrey, and Sussex, uniting southern England under one dynasty. In time, the Kingdom of Kent was fully absorbed into Wessex, and Wessex would give rise to the Kingdom of England, ruled by the West Saxon kings. And so the question remains, lingering like an echo from the age of legend. Was King Egbert the blood of Hengist? If so, the line of England's kings may trace its roots back to the very founder of Kent. Historians remain divided. Some believe Egbert belonged entirely to the West Saxon dynasty, descended from Cerdic. Others suggest a mixed lineage, where the blood of Kent and Wessex became one. The truth lies hidden in the shadows between myth and history, where the fate of kingdoms were forged, and where the legacy of Hengist may yet endure. In the shadowed dawn of post-Roman Britain, one name rises from the mist of legend and history alike: Cerdic. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle hails him as the founder and first king of Wessex, a war leader who ruled from the years 519 to 534, and from whom all later kings of Wessex would claim descent. Yet, Cerdic is no simple figure of recorded fact. His origins, his ethnicity, even his very existence are fiercely debated, leaving him poised between myth and memory. To his contemporaries, Cerdic would not have been known as a West Saxon king, but as the ruler of the Gewissae, a tribal people thought to be Germanic mercenaries who settled in Britain after the Roman withdrawal. Intriguingly, Cerdic's name itself may not be Germanic at all, Many scholars believe it derives from the Brittonic karatikos, suggesting that Cerdic may have been a native Briton whose dynasty became anglicised over generations. This possibility is shared in the names of his descendants. For example, Sealwyn, Cedar, and Cadwalla, names that whisper of a hybrid world where cultures collided and merged. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written more than 3 centuries after Cerdic's death, during the reign of Alfred the Great, is undeniably shaped by time, politics, and myth-making. Yet within its pages, Cerdic stands immortalised as the first king of Wessex, his lineage traced back not merely to mortal ancestors, but to Woden himself, the chief god of the Germanic pantheon. The following description of Cerdic is in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and I will paraphrase it into modern English to make it more understandable. Cerdic and his son Cynric came to Britain with 5 ships, landing at a place forever known as Cerdic's Shore. Cerdic was no ordinary war leader. His bloodline was said to stretch back through generations of kings and heroes. Cerdic, son of Elessa, Elessa, son of Esla, Esla, son of Gewis, Gewis, son of Wig, Wig, son of Freowine, Freowine, son of Thrifogar, Thrifogar, son of Brand, Brand, son of Bealdeag, Bealdeag, son of Woden, chief of the gods. 6 years after their landing, Cerdic and Cynric conquered the land that would become Wessex, driving out the British rulers who held it before them. They were the first kings to claim this realm for the West Saxons. In the year 495, 2 noble war leaders crossed the sea to Britain, Cerdic and his son Cynric. They arrived with 5 ships at a place thereafter known as Cerdic's Shore. On the very day they landed, they clashed in battle with the Britons, and the struggle for the land began. In the year 508, Cerdic and Cynric met the British king Natonleod in battle, and struck him down along with 5,000 of his warriors. From that victory onward, the land from Netley to Cerdic's Ford bore the fallen king's name, marking the bloodshed that claimed it. In the year 519, Cerdic and Cynric took the kingship of the West Saxons. That same year, they fought the Britons again at Cerdic's Ford. From this moment forward, the royal line of the West Saxons began its rule, and their descendants would reign from that day on. In the year 527, Cerdic and Cynric fought another great battle against the Britons, at a place called Cerdic's Lee, pressing their conquest deeper into the land. In the year 530, Cerdic and Cynric conquered the Isle of Wight, slaying many in battle at Whitgar's stronghold. The island was brought under their dominion by force of arms. In the year 534, Cerdic died. After his passing, his son Cynric ruled the West Saxons for 26 winters. Together, they granted the entire Isle of Wight to their nephews Stuff and Whitgar to hold it in their name. The historian John Myers observed that when Cerdic and his son Cynric first appear in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle under the year 495, they are described not as kings, but as ealdormen, a rank that at the time was relatively modest. This detail is striking. The Chronicle presents them as leaders of bands of invaders, yet offers no clear explanation of their authority or origins. Why then are they given the title usually associated with local administration, rather than independent rule? To Myers, this suggests something far more complex than a simple foreign invasion. He argued that the Chronicle subtly hints that Cerdic and his people already held status and responsibility under Roman authority along this stretch of the Saxon shore. Rather than arriving as outsiders, they may have been embedded within the existing administrative and military structures of late Roman Britain. Significantly, It is not until the year 519 that Cerdic and Cynric are said to have begun to reign. Only then do they appear to step beyond the role of subordinate officials or dependent vassals and assume kingship in their own right. Myers therefore proposed that Cerdic may have been the head of a powerful partly British noble family, holding extensive lands at the western end of the Litus Saxonicum, the Saxon shore, a fortified military zone of the late Roman Empire, stretching along both sides of the English Channel. In the final days of Roman or sub-Roman rule, such a family may well have been entrusted with the defence of this frontier. In later Anglo-Saxon terms, Cerdic would have been precisely what one would call an ealdorman. If such a dominant native lineage had already forged blood ties with Saxon settlers in the region, it is easy to see how opportunity followed collapse. As Roman authority weakened and finally faded, Cerdic's family may well have chosen to act independently to seize control rather than await orders that would never come. By eliminating rival British leaders, perhaps including the shadowy Natanleod of the Chronicle's entry for the year 508, they could claim mastery of the land outright. In this light, Cerdic did not simply conquer a kingdom, he stepped into the vacuum left by an empire, transforming inherited authority into kingship. Thus, when the Chronicle records that he began to reign, it marks not a sudden arrival, but the final breaking away from any higher power, Roman or British, and the birth of a new royal house. Of course, this is just a theory. As in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle it clearly states, Cerdic and his son Cynric arrived with 5 ships at a place thereafter known as Cerdic Shore. Descent from Cerdic became the very foundation of kingship in Wessex. According to the West Saxon genealogical list, every king of Wessex claimed direct descent through the male line from him, binding royal authority to his blood. A 10th century manuscript, known as the Anglican Collection, compiled at Glastonbury during the reign of King Ethelstan, the first king of England, records this lineage in full, affirming that even England's earliest monarch traced his right to rule back to Cerdic. From these beginnings, Cerdic's Wessex rose to become the most powerful kingdom in the land. In the early 9th century, King Egbert expanded its dominion through victory over Mercia, earning the title Bretwalda, or Wide Ruler. This legacy passed to his son Ethelwulf, who consolidated his father's conquests and strengthened the military and economic foundations of Wessex. Facing the growing storm of Viking raids, Ethelwulf adapted and endured, securing the survival of the kingdom. His sons would reign one after the other, each dying in turn, until the crown fell to the youngest and greatest of them all, Alfred the Great. Alfred earned his name not through conquest alone, but through salvation. He saved Wessex from Viking destruction, unified the fractured Anglo-Saxon realms, and reshaped his kingdom through reforms in education, law, and military organisation. He was not merely a warrior, but a visionary who rebuilt a nation. His son, Edward the Elder, transformed Alfred's defensive achievements into an aggressive and successful campaign of expansion. Through fortified towns, economic strength, and relentless pressure, he shattered Danish power in southern England and laid the foundations of a single English kingdom, forcing the submission of rival rulers across Mercia and Northumbria. Edward's son Ethelstan became the first true king of England, through military brilliance, most famously at the Battle of Brunanburh, and through wise centralised governance. He unified the realm and elevated England into a recognised power of Europe, admired for its learning, piety, and authority. Thus the House of Wessex became the first royal house of England. Their direct rule ended in the year 1066 with the death of Edward the Confessor. a peaceful king far removed from the warrior kings who had forged and defended the realm. Yet the legacy of Cerdic did not fade. After the Norman conquest, Matilda of Scotland, daughter of Margaret of Wessex, who was descended from the legendary warrior king Edmund Ironside, married Henry I of England, restoring Cerdic's bloodline to the English throne through the female line. And so the blood of Cerdic reigned as kings of Wessex for more than 3 centuries, as kings of England for over 100 years, and returned to the monarchy even after conquest and crown had changed hands. His legacy endured not merely in names or chronicles, but in the very making of England itself. In the shadowed dawn of the early medieval world, a new power rose in the heart of Britain, Mercia, a kingdom carved from forest, river, and iron will. One of the 7 great realms of the Anglo-Saxon age, Mercia stood where England's Midlands now lie, and at its beginning stood a single man. Aicel was remembered as the first king of the Mercians, a ruler whose bloodline reached back across the North Sea to the ancient royal houses of the continental Germanic world. Alone among the kings of the Anglo-Saxon world, the Mercian dynasty claimed descent not merely from warriors, but from kings who ruled before the migration. Around the year 515, as Roman Britain faded into memory, Aicel is said to have led his people across the cold, restless waters of the North Sea, into a land divided, contested, and ripe for conquest. From this upheaval, he forged a new people, a new kingdom, and a royal house that would endure for centuries. The House of Aicel, the Islingers, one of the most formidable dynasties England would ever know. From his line would rise Penda, the last great pagan king of the Anglo-Saxons, feared, relentless, and unconquered in battle until his famed death, and later Offa, the most powerful of all Mercian rulers, a king who dared to call himself King of the English, who built a great dike across the land, and whose silver penny reshaped England's economy. Yet Aicel himself was born in an age before chronicles, before witness, before certainty. His life was never written down, but his name endured. This is his story. Aicel was said to be the son of Eomer, king of the Angles, a people born in the narrow lands of Angolan, what is now northern Germany, long before their fate carried them across the sea. From that ancient homeland, the memory of their kings was not written in chronicles alone, but sung, preserved in the heroic poetry of Widsith, an Old English poem, Beowulf, an epic in the tradition of Germanic heroic legend, and later set down in the pages of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The Chronicle records the bloodline of Mercian kings, as a chain unbroken reaching back through generations of warriors and rulers. Cneber was the son of Aicel, Aicel the son of Eomer, Eomer the son of Anglothau, Anglothau the son of Offa, Offa the son of Weamund, Weamund the son of Whitleg, Whitleg the son of Woden. The same tradition is echoed in the Textus Rofensis, which speaks of Mercia's first king, Aicel born of Eomer, whose ancestors reach back to Woden. Yet these names are not hollow echoes of myth. Many of Aicel's forebears stand firmly within the heroic tradition of Northern Europe. His great-grandfather Offa of Angel, remembered as a mighty and legendary king of the Angles, appears not only in English verse, but in the Gesta Danorum of Saxo Grammaticus, there celebrated as a Danish ruler from an age so old that the land itself had not yet been called Denmark. Offa's father Weamund is likewise remembered across the North Sea world, praised in the Gesta Danorum and immortalised in the epic of Beowulf, where the deeds of his house are woven into the fabric of heroic legend. Thus, Aicel did not rise from obscurity. He stood at the end of a long and storied line and lineage of kings, warriors and gods, carrying the weight of ancient authority from the continental world into Britain, where a new kingdom would rise in his name. Aysel was born before the turning of the 6th century. If the ancient genealogies speak true, he inherited the kingship of the Angles upon the death of his father Eomer, ruling from the old continental homeland of Angland on the northern shores of the Germanic world. But Aysel would be the last king of Anglia in that ancient land, around the year 510, as the Roman order in Britain faded into memory and new powers pressed westward. Aysel led his people across the cold waters of the North Sea. This was not merely a migration, but a royal exodus, a movement of a ruling house, warbands and families, carrying with them their laws, their gods, and their claim to kingship. In the same year, tradition holds, Aysel established himself as king of the Mercians, founding a new realm in the heart of Britain. Moving along the great river systems, the Wash, the Trent, and the fertile valleys beyond, his people pushed inland, settling, conquering, and reshaping the land. By the year 527, Aysel's advance had carried him through East Anglia and deep into Mercia itself. Though written centuries later, the Flores Historiarum preserves a memory of this violent age. Pagans came from Germany and occupied East Anglia, the country of the East Angles, and some of them invaded Mercia and waged war against the British. Behind these words lies a world of burning settlements, shifting frontiers, and collapsing British kingdoms. Aysel's rise unfolded amid this chaos, not as a lone conqueror, but as the architect of a new political order, forged where older powers fell. In around the year 526, his son Cnut was born, heir to a kingship that was no longer bound to the continent, but rooted in British soil. By the end of Aysel's reign, he is said to have held wide territories across both East Anglia and Mercia, an authority broad enough that later generations would remember him not merely as a leader, but as the first true king of Mercia. Though his life was never recorded by those who knew him, the shape of his legacy endured. When Aysel died, perhaps around the year 535, the kingdom he founded did not fragment or fade. Power passed smoothly to his son Cnut, and the royal house he established, the Islingas, would dominate central England for centuries. Aysel himself stands on uncertain ground between history and memory. His existence cannot be proven beyond doubt, yet neither can it be dismissed. The medieval historian Nicholas Brooks suggests that if Aysel was indeed a historical figure, he would have lived sometime between the year 450 and 525, in the formative years following Rome's withdrawal from Britain. He was likely remembered as the founder of the Mercian royal dynasty, not because he ruled a fully formed kingdom, but because he was the first of his lineage to establish itself in Britain. The Islingas later claimed descent from the rulers and heroic figures of continental Angland, and traced their bloodline back to Woden, the ancient war god of the Germanic world. Yet Brooks cautions against reading these claims as evidence of early supremacy. Before the rise of King Penda, the Islingas were in all likelihood no more and no less royal than the ruling families of other small midland people. Within this framework, Aysel appears not as the ruler of a great realm, but as the leader of an Anglian group migrating into Britain, a man remembered for movement rather than dominion. His life stands at the beginning of the Mercian story, yet the kingdom itself would not take shape until generations later. Between Aysel and the emergence of Mercia lie 3 generations. His son Cnut was followed by Sinwald, and then by Creoda, a figure many historians regard as the first true king of Mercia. Thus, Aysel's significance lies not in the power he wielded, but in the lineage he began. He marks the moment when a family crossed the sea, took root in Britain, and set in motion a chain of inheritance that would, in time, give rise to one of England's greatest kingdoms. From the shadowed figure of Aicel, there emerged a lineage that would shape the fate of England for more than 2 centuries. It was under Penda, who rose to the Mercian throne in around the year 626, that the power of the Aeslingas first entered the clear light of history. Penda is the earliest Mercian king named in the Anglican collection, and he stands apart as both a formidable warlord and would be the last pagan king of Mercia. From his reign onward, the house founded by Aicel would provide no fewer than 11 kings to the Mercian throne. The dynasty reached the height of its authority under Offa of Mercia, a ruler whose power extended far beyond his own borders. Offa bent the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to his will, forged alliances with the great courts of Europe, and dared to style himself King of the English. His reign marked the moment when Mercia stood not merely as a kingdom among others, but as the dominant power of the island. Yet such heights are rarely held for long. After Offa's death, the foundations of his dynasty began to crack. His son Egfrith succeeded him, but according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, his reign lasted only 141 days. The histories reveal the dark cost of Offa's ambition. Offa, determined to secure the crown for his son, had shed much blood, eliminating rivals and tightening his grip on the succession. Offa had crowned Egfrith during his own lifetime and swept aside competing claimants. Yet these measures proved ruinous. When Egfrith died, there were no close male heirs left to sustain the line. His successor, Ceolwulf, was only distantly related, and with Egfrith's death, the direct bloodline of Aicel came to an end. The great house of the Aeslingas would fade from power. Yet dynasties do not vanish entirely. Though the Aeslingas lost their crown, their memory endured in the land itself. Across England, place names are thought to preserve echoes of Aicel and its people. Icklingham, Ickleton, Ickleford, and Ixworth, quiet reminders that long before charters and chronicles, a king's name could be written into the soil. Thus ended the rule of the Aeslingas. Aicel was not remembered for deeds recorded in ink, but for a legacy that reshaped the heart of England. Before East Anglia had saints and monasteries, before its kings were crowned in stone halls or remembered in written lore, there was Weher. In the shadowed centuries of the 6th Age, as new peoples crossed the sea and the old Roman world finally faded from Britain, Anglo-Saxon tradition remembers Weher as the first king of the East Angles. If he lived, as the records suggest, he ruled as a pagan lord in a time of settlement and struggle, when migrants from Frisia and the southern Jutland Peninsula carved out a new kingdom along the eastern shores of England. This was an age before chronicles, when power was carried by blood and by the sword. From Weher would come Wuffa, his son, who founded the House of the Woofingers, the royal dynasty that ruled over East Anglia for generations, over the lands that would become Norfolk and Suffolk. Under the Woofingers, East Anglia would rise as one of the great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, its kings buried with treasure, its warriors remembered in legend. Yet much of their story has been lost to time. The Viking invasions of the 9th century and the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th shattered the libraries where their deeds were once preserved. What remains are fragments, names, lineages, echoes. One such echo survives in the Historia Brittonum, which names Weher, father of Wuffa, as the first of the Woofingers. From this single line, historians trace the origins of the dynasty to the middle of the 6th century, when East Anglia first emerged from the mist as a kingdom. This is his story, The Anglian collection preserves one of the great royal genealogies of the Anglo-Saxon world, a lineage woven as much from myth as from memory. In its reckoning, Wehre stands within an ancient chain of fathers and sons, born of Wilhelm, who came from Hurth, Hurth from Hrodmund, Hrodmund from Tryggil, Tryggil from Titman, Titman from Kasser Odinson, and Kasser himself traced to Woden, the god of kingship, war and fate. Through this sacred ancestry, the blood of the divine was believed to flow directly into the royal houses of the East Angles. From Wehre sprang Wulfr, the founder of the Wulfingers dynasty, whose name would echo through the history of East Anglia. The Wulfingers kings would later rule as lords of the eastern shores, their authority bound not only to land and sword, but to a carefully guarded memory of descent from gods and heroes. If Wehre is accepted as the true dynastic founder, then it was in this period that the family's power first took firm root in East Anglia. Before this, their forebears likely belonged to a hazy world of semi-legendary rulers, perhaps remembered from continental or Scandinavian homelands, where Anglian and Geatish kings once ruled from across the North Sea. Wehre stands at the dawn of the dynasty, a leader among the new arrivals who crossed the sea to England. He was almost certainly a king, or at least a high chieftain of the people from whom he sprang, bearing authority earned through lineage, war, and command. Yet the land of Wehre's origins remained veiled in uncertainty, and from this uncertainty rival traditions arise. Some scholars place his homeland in southern Jutland, among the Anglian peoples of the continental north. Others push his beginnings farther still, across the cold waters of the Baltic. In this view, the East Angles are identified with the Geats, a North Germanic people who once dwelled in what is now southern Sweden, famed in later legend for their warrior kings. For a time, the riches unearthed at Sutton Hoo seemed to give powerful voice to this northern claim. The sword, the helmet, and the great shield from the ship burial were thought to be ancient heirlooms of the Wulfingers, carried across the sea from Sweden at the opening of the 6th century, treasures that would speak of a royal house newly transplanted, yet fiercely mindful of its ancestral homeland. Closer study, however, has softened this certainty. It is now widely believed that these objects were fashioned in England itself, inspired perhaps by Scandinavian styles, rather than imported from Scandinavian shores. As a result, the question of their true origins remains open. The name Wehre itself carries a quiet but powerful resonance in the world of heroic legend. Many scholars have seen it as a shortened familiar form of the name Witstan, the warrior of Beowulf and father of the young hero Wiglaf, whose loyalty would outshine all others at the poem's tragic end. Such an identification would place Wehre among the northern elite, a man shaped by the politics and blood feuds of the Scylfing kings, whose world Beowulf remembers in flashes of violence and splendour. From this perspective, Wehre would not have been a mere migrant leader, but a figure of noble standing, who carried with him the prestige of a Scandinavian dynasty when he crossed the sea to East Anglia. This link also strengthens the long-suspected bond between the Wulfingers of East Anglia and the Swedish royal house. The Wulfingers' claim of descent from ancient kings, and ultimately from Woden himself, finds a literary reflection in Beowulf, where lineage, loyalty, and divine ancestry are the foundations of rightful rule. Nevertheless, the life and reign of Wehre lie almost wholly beyond the reach of history. Nothing certain is known of his deeds or his governance, for no written records, if any were ever set down, have survived from this shadowed age of East Anglia. At some unknown moment, Wehre was succeeded by his son Wulfr, who was said to have been ruling the kingdom by the year 571, according to the medieval chronicler Roger of Wendover. The name Woofer is commonly understood to mean little wolf, a meaning rich in symbolic power. From it, the dynasty took the name Woofingers, the kin of the wolf, a title that evokes ferocity, loyalty, and noble blood. Strikingly, this name is identical to the Wolfings, a renowned clan celebrated in Beowulf and in the Old English poem Widsith. In heroic literature, the Wolfings are remembered as the ruling house of the Eastern Geats, a people who held sway over the lands of southern Sweden. Again and again, the poetry of the early Germanic world gestures northward, suggesting that the ancestors of the Woofingers emerged from that Scandinavian realm. Yet the precise identity of the ruling house to which they belonged remains elusive, obscured by the passage of time and the mingling of history with heroic tradition. Wehre's significance is magnified by what followed. He was the great-grandfather of Redwald, one of the most powerful and renowned kings of the Anglo-Saxon age, a ruler who stood at the crossroads of pagan and Christian belief, and whose authority was recognised far beyond East Anglia. It is widely believed that Redwald was laid to rest in the magnificent ship burial at Sutton Hoo, surrounded by treasures fit for a king of legend. Redwald, the most famous son of the Woofinger line, was recognised as Bretwalda, an overlord among the English kings, his authority stretching far beyond the flat lands and waterways of East Anglia. The splendour of Sutton Hoo stands as their enduring monument, a ship prepared for voyage beyond death, laden with arms, regalia, and symbols of sovereignty worthy of epic song. Yet the later generations of the dynasty were marked by turmoil and sacrifice. Kings fell in battle, were murdered in feuds, or died as martyrs in the violent struggle between old gods and the new faith. Eopwald, who was Redwald's son, was slain for his Christianity. Sigibert, another of Redwald's sons, having laid down his crown for his faith, was dragged back to war and killed. Anna and Ethelhere, Redwald's descendants, fell fighting the rising power of Mercia. The Woofingers ruled in an age when kingship was never secure, and crowns were paid for in blood. The last king of the Woofingers line was Elfwald. With him, the ancient wolf kin passed into history. No son of his continued the line, and the royal blood of Wehre, Woofer, and Redwald faded from the throne. Though East Anglia remained a kingdom, its kings were no longer descended from the house that claimed ancestry from Woden and kinship with the heroes of Beowulf. After the Woofingers, East Anglian kingship entered a more fragile age. The kingdom increasingly fell under the influence and at times the dominion of stronger neighbours, especially Mercia. The final fate of the kingdom came in the year 869, when the great heathen army of the Vikings swept across East Anglia. King Edmund, later revered as Edmund the Martyr, was slain, and the ancient kingship was extinguished. East Anglia passed into Danish hands, and was later absorbed into the unified Kingdom of England. In the shadowed dawn of Anglo-Saxon England, when kingdoms were carved by sword and shield, one name rose above the clash of iron and the roar of the sea: Aelle. Aelle, the first king of Sussex and lord of the South Saxons, began his reign in the year 477, ruling until the year 514. In an age when Britain trembled between the fading light of Rome and the rising storm of the Saxons, he stood as a conqueror, a war leader, and a founder of realms. Centuries later, the great 8th century chronicler Bede would remember him not merely as a king, but as a ruler of Imperium, a man who held the overlordship over other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. In the late 9th century, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle would go further still, naming him the first Bretwalda, the ruler of Britain, a title reserved for those whose power stretched beyond borders and whose will shaped the fate of the land. Bede lists 7 kings who bore such supremacy. Aelle stands first among them. He was no Christian monarch guided by the cross. He was a king of the old gods, a lord of warriors, forged in battle, ruling in a time when destiny was written in blood and steel. This is the story of Aelle, the first Bretwalda, the founding king of Sussex, and one of the earliest giants of England's dark and legendary age. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was compiled in the Kingdom of Wessex in around the year 890, during the reign of Alfred the Great. Though set to parchment 4 centuries after Aelle's time, it preserves echoes of a far older memory, drawn from ancient chronicles, warrior traditions, and the living breath of saga. And in its entries, the name Aelle burns bright. In the year 477, the chronicle tells us, Aelle came to Britain with his 3 sons, Simon, Welsing and Cissa, sailing across the Grey Sea in 3 ships. They made landfall at a place thereafter known as Simon's Shore, and there they fell upon the British with relentless fury. Many were slain, others were driven in terror into the vast forest of Andresleag, swallowed by its shadowed depths. In the year 485, Aelle again met the Britons in battle, this time beside the banks of Meercred's Burn. Steel rang against steel, and the fate of southern lands was decided in blood. Other accounts of the battle emerge from later and more elaborate traditions. Among them is the version offered by Henry of Huntingdon, the 12th century historian, who paints a more measured and complex scene. In his telling, when Aelle and his sons met the Britons in battle, neither side claimed true victory. The struggle ended not in triumph, but in a stalemate, and from this uneasy balance arose a pledge of friendship between the 2 peoples. Yet beneath the fragile accord, ambition endured. After the truce, the Anglo-Saxons are said to have sent word back across to their Germanic homelands, calling for reinforcements. What peace had been sworn may have been little more than a pause before the storm. Writing in the 14th century, the chronicler Roger of Wendover adds further detail, naming the leader of the British forces as Aurelius Ambrosius, a figure long associated with the resistance of the Saxon advance. Thus, through the centuries, the story grows richer and more layered, as chroniclers sought to illuminate the clash that helped shape the fate of early Britain. In the year 491, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle speaks of a siege, grim and final. Aelle and his son Cissa encircled the stronghold of Andredacester. When its walls at last fell, none within was spared, not a single Briton remained. The old order was swept away, and the land passed fully into Saxon hands. Thus did Aelle carve out a kingdom by fire and iron. The chronicle names him once more, under the year 827, where he is remembered as the first of the 8 Bretwalds, the rulers of Britain. This title, first recorded by Bede and later expanded to include Egbert of Wessex, marked those kings whose authority rose above all others, overlords whose power cast long shadows across the land. Scholars have long debated what this supremacy truly meant, and how far Aelle's dominion stretched, and how firm his grasp upon southern England truly was. Yet one fact stands unchallenged: his name stands first. Between Aelle and the next king named among Bede's overlords, Selwyn of Wessex in the later 6th century, there lies a silence in the record, a long and echoing gap. It is though Aelle's age stood apart, a fierce and foundational chapter in the very making of England. He was not merely a king of Sussex. He was remembered as the first to rise above kings, the first Bretwalder, a warlord of the early dawn, whose coming reshaped the very fate of Britain. However, unlike the proud genealogies preserved by other Anglo-Saxon realms, Sussex stands veiled in silence, its royal line half lost in mist and memory. Yet tradition holds that Cissa, the son of Aella, succeeded his father upon his death. Cissa, who had stood beside Aella in the hard forging of the South Saxon kingdom, is remembered as his heir, a prince tempered with the same fires of conquest. The city of Chichester, first named in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in the year 895, is said to bear his name, a faint but enduring echo of his rule. And then, silence. For more than a century and a half after Cissa, the record falls dark. No deeds are told, no lineage is certain. We do not know whether he left sons to inherit his crown, whether strife rose among brothers contending for their father's realm, or whether his bloodline withered into obscurity. The next king to step from that darkness into the light of history is Ethelweard, remembered as the first Christian king of Sussex. Under his rule, the old pagan order began to yield to the cross. Yet his reign ended not in peace, but in violence. Around the year 685, he was slain during an invasion led by Cedwalla, the fierce West Saxon prince who would soon claim the throne of Wessex. After the fall of Ethelweard, Sussex flickered briefly under lesser rulers, perhaps local lords, but the kingdom's independence had been broken. By the early 8th century, Sussex lay beneath the dominance first of Wessex and later Mercia, and it would never again rise as a sovereign power. Thus, while later men bore the title of king in Sussex, Ethelweard is likely regarded as the last truly independent ruler of the South Saxons, before their realm was absorbed into mightier kingdoms. And above them all, towering at the dawn of their history, stands Aella. He alone shines with undimmed renown, the first Bretwalder, the war leader who carved a kingdom from contested soil, the conqueror who warred against the Britons when England itself was still being born. Yet the full measure of his greatness is hidden from us, lost in the long night between memory and myth. In the dim dawn of England's first age, when the sea wind carried sails of strangers and war bands carved kingdoms from fog and memory, a name emerged: Ida. He stands as the earliest remembered king of Bernicia, ruling from about the years 547 until his death in the year 559. From Ida sprang a royal line destined not merely to survive, but to conquer, shattering the resistance of the Britons and forging from divided lands the formidable kingdom of Northumbria. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that he ruled 12 years and raised his stronghold at Bamborough. There, upon a black crag of volcanic stone, where a Brittonic fortress once stood, Ida seized the citadel by force and remade it. From that seat he ruled, and from that height his descendants would reign as kings of Bernicia. Here begins the story of a dynasty and the making of a kingdom. This is his story. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, it states, "In the year of our Lord 547, Ida took the throne, and from him sprang the first royal line of the Northumbrians. He was the son of Oepa, Oepa son of Essa, Essa son of Ingwi, Ingwi son of Anguinit, Anguinit son of Alok, Alok son of Benok, Benok son of Brand, Brand son of Balde, Balde son of Woden." Thus the kings of the Norse traced their blood not merely to men, but to legend, a lineage reaching beyond memory into the twilight of the gods. Before England was a kingdom, before it was even a people, there was a frontier, along the cold edge of the northern sea, where wind scoured the cliffs and the land itself seemed carved from iron. A warlord came ashore. His name was Ida. History remembers him as the first king of Mercia, yet he did not inherit a crown. He seized a coastline. In the year 547, leading a band of Anglian settlers from across the North Sea, he landed upon a land already ancient, already claimed, already defended. This was not empty territory. It was Britain, a land of hill forts, great Roman buildings, old gods, Roman roads, and Celtic kingdoms that had endured for centuries after Rome's legions had gone. To the newcomers, it was a place to conquer. The Angles were sea folk, migrants, raiders, farmers, and fighters from the coasts of northern Germany and southern Denmark. They did not arrive as an army of a single nation, but as separate war bands, warrior households bound by loyalty to a leader rather than loyalty to a state. Their culture was harsh but proud, where fate ruled all. A man's glory lived only in reputation, and reputation lived only in victory. Their society revolved around the warband, the hearth companions who fought beside their lord, feasted beside him, and died beside him. Gold rings were not mere wealth, they were promises. A king was a ring giver, and loyalty was purchased not in coin, but in honour. Ida was one such warlord, perhaps a refugee from conflicts across the sea, perhaps an ambitious adventurer, perhaps a dispossessed noble seeking a new homeland. The records do not say, but he arrived not as a settler asking permission, but as a conqueror claiming destiny. At the heart of Ida's legend stands a fortress, Bamborough. It rose from a black volcanic crag above the sea, nearly impregnable, long held by Britons who understood its value. Whoever held that rock commanded the coast and the surrounding plains, and Ida attacked it. We are not told how, whether by siege, treachery, starvation or storm, only that he took it, and that afterwards he rebuilt it as his royal seat. Timber halls replaced Brittonic defences, banners flew from its heights, and the fortress became the centre of a new kingdom. From that rock, Mercia was born. The Britons resisted fiercely. They knew the land. They held fortified hills, and they understood that this enemy did not seek tribute. It sought replacement. Battles likely erupted along river valleys and Roman roads, in ambushes, skirmishes, and sudden assaults. For years the frontier shifted back and forth, but the Angles had one advantage: persistence. A defeated warband might retreat, a migrating people simply returned. Each generation pushed further inland. Brittonic strongholds fell one by one, and territory once shared became territory lost forever. Ida may not have conquered vast lands himself, but he carved the foothold that made conquest inevitable. What mattered most was never what Ida won, but what he began. From his landing on the northern shore arose a dynasty, the Idingas. From that single foothold grew a realm of Angles stretching across what is now northern England and the lowlands of southern Scotland. At first it was divided, Mercia in the north and Dira in the south, rival kingdoms sharing a land but not a crown. Then, around the year 604, Ida's grandson Ethelfrith bound them together. He was one of Ida's great descendants. He warred relentlessly against the Britons, struck down the power of Dalriata, and at the Battle of Chester shattered a great alliance of native kingdoms. With that victory, the old order of Roman Britain finally broke in the north, and Northumbria rose not merely as a territory, but as a power feared across the island. Another famed descendant of Ida was Oswiu, the first true king of a fully realised Northumbria. At the river Wimwaed, he faced Penda of Mercia, the last great pagan warlord of the Anglo-Saxons, and destroyed him. From that moment, Oswiu's authority stretched far beyond his own borders, and he was hailed as overlord across much of Britain, the Bretwalda. For nearly 2.5 centuries, every rightful Northumbrian ruler traced his blood back to Ida. Kingship was lineage, legitimacy was ancestry. The throne belonged not merely to the strongest, but to the house that had founded the realm. Even in the late 8th century, King Osred II still carried the blood of the first conqueror who had seized the coastal rock. But after his death in the year 790, the ancient royal line vanished from the crown. Northumbria passed into the hands of rival dynasties, and the sacred descent once claimed from Woden faded from kingship. Yet the blood endured in the north. Genealogies grow uncertain after those years, but chroniclers continue to regard the rulers of Bamborough as heirs of the old Bernician kings. Among them stood Uhtred the Bold, a descendant of the ancient house, ruling from the same fortress Ida had captured nearly 5 centuries before. By his lifetime, the kingdom itself was fractured under Viking conquest and English reconquest, yet Bamborough remained the seat of a northern lordship, almost a principality in all but name. Uhtred and his kin governed as frontier lords, fighting Scots, bargaining with Norse rulers, serving, and sometimes defying the kings of England. As Earl of Northumbria, he held the entire region in his grasp, a last echo of the warrior kings who had once ruled freely from the northern sea. Then came the Normans. After the conquest of 1066, the old order of the Anglo-Saxons ended. Ida's distant lineage no longer ruled the north, and Bamborough itself was torn down and razed again in stone by new masters. In the year 1095, William II besieged the fortress during a rebellion, and after, it passed permanently into royal hands. The dynasty was gone, the kingdom was gone, but the beginning remained. For before England had one crown, before it had one people, a warlord climbed a black rock above the sea and made it his throne. From that act came kings, kingdoms, and centuries of history. And at the root of it all stood Ida, the first Anglo-Saxon lord of the north, and the spark from which Northumbria was born. Esquine of Essex is remembered as the first ruler of the East Saxons, the ancestor of the dynasty that would one day hold London in the 7th century. He belongs to the dawn of Anglo-Saxon England, the Migration Age, a time that lives between archaeology and written record, roughly from the late 5th to the middle of the 6th century. Even his name carries meaning. Aesk could mean the ash tree, but also the ashwood spear, the emblem of the warrior. Wine meant friend, protector, the companion of a lord. His name therefore means friend of the spear or protector of the warband. In the world he lived in, kingship demanded more than power, it demanded sacred ancestry. Royal houses traced their bloodlines into the realm of myth, and uniquely among early English dynasties, Esquine was said to descend from Cnut, the tribal god of the Saxons themselves, a divine forefather who embodied the identity of the people. So whether we see him as a man, memory or legend, Esquine stands at the threshold of English history, the moment when wandering warbands became kingdoms. This is his story. Among all the gods claimed by early English kings, Woden, Ing, Til, one stands apart. Not a universal Germanic deity, not shared by Scandinavia or the continent at large, but a god belonging specifically to the Saxon people themselves, Cnut. His name survives only in genealogies and oaths. He defined who the Saxons believed they were. The name breaks into two Old English elements: seax, the long singled-edged knife carried by every Saxon warrior, a tool, a weapon, an ethnic symbol. The tribe itself was named after it. Neat meaning companion, kinsman or follower, so the name likely meant kinlord of the Saxons. He appears in a continental baptismal renunciation used for converting Saxons to Christianity, stating, "I renounce Thunor, Woden and Cnut." This matters because it proves missionaries believed he was important enough that converts had to formally abandon him, meaning he was a central identity god, not a minor spirit. Cnut was likely an ancestral god, or the very father of the Saxon people, a war patron, or a guardian of warriors and loyalty, an identity maker that separated the Saxons from other Germanic tribes. The East Saxon royal line uniquely traced descent not primarily to Woden, but to Cnut. This mattered politically. Most English kingdoms claimed divine prestige, but Essex claimed ethnic legitimacy, meaning their king was not just chosen by the gods. He was kin to the Saxons themselves. This would have been extremely powerful during the Migration Age, when the populations were still forming identities. Across the cold waters of the North Sea, across the wind-cut coasts of the continental Saxon world, the marshlands of northern Germany, the mist-drowned edges of Jutland. From that horizon came the people later called the East Saxons, and among the leaders remembered by their descendants stands Esquine of Essex. In graves across Essex, archaeologists have found cremation urns identical to those used along the Elbe region of northern Germany. The brooches buried with women match the styles worn on the continental coast. Weapons placed beside the dead follow the customs of Saxon warrior groups, and even the animal pattern designs, carved into metalwork, closely resemble those produced in northern Germany. In other words, early Essex did not gradually develop from the local British population. It appeared as an already formed community, a society brought across the sea and established in a new land. Esquine was probably not the leader of a single invading army. Instead, he was more likely the head of a group of migrating clans, families as well as warriors, moving with their belongings and animals in search of a new land to settle. For a long time, history imagined the Saxon arrival as a sudden conquest, great fleets landing, cities burning, armies clashing beneath walls. But the evidence tells a slower and quieter story. In the late 5th century, small boats began entering the river mouths along Britain's eastern coast. The newcomers did not march towards the abandoned Roman towns. Instead, they settled the marshes, farmed the valleys, and lived beside the waters they already understood. Over time, the settlements multiplied. Burials contain women and children as well as warriors, and trade routes formed between communities. These people were no longer raiders, they became inhabitants. By the early 6th century, the scattered groups needed leadership. Alliances formed, rival chiefs competed, and one lineage gradually gained authority over the others. Here later memory places Esquine of Essex not as the first Saxon to arrive, but the leader who united the settlers. Yet Britain was not empty. Romano-British communities still lived in hill forts, at river crossings, and in the fading remains of the old imperial city, Londinium. For decades the land was shared uneasily between Brittonic farmers, Saxon settlers, and competing war bands. The struggle was not a single battle, but many years of tension. The newcomers did not need to storm London's walls. Instead, the countryside slowly changed hands. Saxon villages controlled the farmland, roads, and trade routes. Cut off from supplies, the old Roman town declined further. Some inhabitants moved away, others stayed and adapted. By the time later East Saxon kings openly ruled London, they inherited a place already transformed. The conquest had not been sudden, it had been gradual, and in the end inevitable. In later ages, when monks tried to give every kingdom a beginning worthy of memory, they told a powerful story. They said that Escwine of Essex once stood beneath the banners of Octa of Kent, a lesser ruler under a greater one, until the day he refused to bow. According to tradition, the two kings met in battle in the year 527, somewhere along the marshlands of the River Lee. There, the tale says Escwine defeated Octa and broke Kentish authority forever, and from that victory the kingdom of the East Saxons was born. In truth, the early Saxon world of the Thames was a frontier. Rival warbands watched each other across rivers and wetlands. Alliances shifted, leaders competed, and over time, one lineage stood above the rest. That memory of a man who united the East Saxons and no longer answered to neighbouring kingdoms survived long after details were forgotten. Medieval writers shaped it into a single heroic event: one king, one battle, one victory. Though counted among the kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England, Essex never left behind the wealth of records preserved by its neighbours. No native chronicle tells its story. Few charters survive. In the great histories of early England, it appears only briefly, a kingdom more often standing in the shadow of others rather than in the light of its own fame. For much of its existence, the kings descended from Escwine of Essex, and they were ruled beneath stronger overlords, at times Kent, at times East Anglia, and later Mercia. Yet their line endured, and among them rose Sebert of Essex, the first East Saxon king to accept Christianity. Even then the old world did not vanish overnight. After his death, his sons returned openly to the worship of their ancestral gods, permitting their people to honour the idols of their forefathers, a reminder that belief does not change in a single generation. Only gradually over decades did the rulers of Essex join the wider conversion of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. But the age of small kingdoms was passing. By the early 9th century, the last ruler of the East Saxons, Sigred of Essex, no longer stood as an equal among kings, reduced first to a subordinate lord, and finally compelled to submit to Egbert of Wessex. He yielded his realm in the year 825. From that moment, Essex ceased to exist as an independent kingdom, absorbed into a greater power that would one day become England. And so the royal line ended. The dynasty that had claimed descent from Cnut, the ancient god of the Saxons, and traced its beginning to a founder remembered across centuries. The kingdom vanished, but the memory did not. The true beginnings of the North Sea Empire can be traced to Sweyn Forkbeard. Exiled in his youth from the royal hall of his father for unruly conduct, Sweyn was said to have been raised among the Joms Vikings, legendary seafaring warriors, and perhaps the most formidable mercenary force in Scandinavia. There, he forged a close bond with the Order's founder, Palnatoke. In his younger years, Sweyn carved out a fearsome reputation, plundering, raiding, and terrorizing the coasts of the North and Baltic seas. So great did his threat become, that he was eventually drawn into open conflict with his father, Harold Bluetooth. Father and son met in a naval clash, remembered as the Battle of Isfjord. According to legend, it was Palnatoke himself who slew Harold with an arrow. Soon after, Sweyn was crowned the King of Denmark, securing the first great peace of what would one day become the North Sea Empire. Sweyn's next great step toward power came through his conflict with Olaf Tryggvason, the King of Norway. By the end of the 10th century, Olaf had become one of the most powerful rulers in the north. He had taken control of Norway, forced many of its people to accept Christianity, and built a strong kingdom that stood outside Danish control. For Sweyn, this was a serious threat. Denmark had long claimed influence over parts of Norway, especially Viken in the south. Olaf's rule challenged that influence and made him a dangerous rival. The conflict was also personal. According to the Heimskringla, Olaf had once sought to marry Sigrid the Haughty, but the match failed when she refused to abandon the old gods and accept Christianity. Olaf was said to have struck her in anger, and Sigrid never forgot the insult. She later married Sweyn Forkbeard and urged him to take revenge. She reminded him that Olaf had also married Thiri, Sweyn's sister, without his approval. To Sweyn, this was not only an insult to his family, but a challenge to his authority. Sweyn was not the only ruler who wanted Olaf destroyed. He formed an alliance with Olaf the Swedish king and Earl Erik Hakonsson, the son of Earl Hakon the Powerful, who had once ruled Norway before Olaf Tryggvason came to power. Earl Erik had his own reasons for revenge, and he wanted to restore the power of his family in Norway. Together, they planned to trap Olaf at sea. The Jomsvikings played an important role in this plan. Their leader, Earl Sigvaldi of Jomsborg, pretended to be Olaf's ally. Olaf trusted him and believed that Sigvaldi would support him if danger came. But Sigvaldi had secretly joined Sweyn and the other enemies of Olaf. Olaf had been in Wendland, where he was dealing with matters connected to his wife Thiri's property. When he sailed home, Sigvaldi guided him toward the island of Svold. There, Sweyn Forkbeard, Olaf the Swede, and Earl Erik were waiting with their fleets. Olaf's ships came forward one by one. The allied kings watched from their ships, waiting for Olaf's great vessel, the Long Serpent. Sweyn believed several times that he had seen it, but Earl Erik corrected him, knowing the Norwegian ships better. At last, the Long Serpent appeared. It was the greatest ship in Olaf's fleet, and one of the most famous ships in the sagas. When Sweyn saw it, he declared that he would command that ship before the day was over. Earl Erik was more cautious. He warned that if Olaf had no other ships than the Long Serpent, Sweyn would still not be able to take it with the Danish fleet alone. This showed how dangerous Olaf was considered, even when surrounded by enemies. Olaf's men urged him to sail away and avoid the battle, since the enemy force was much larger. But Olaf refused. He chose to stand and fight. The Norwegian ships were tied together, with the Long Serpent at the centre. Olaf prepared to face all three enemies at once: Sweyn and the Danes, Olaf and the Swedes, and Earl Erik with his Norwegian warriors. Sweyn Forkbeard attacked first. He brought the Danish fleet against Olaf's ships, but the Norwegians fought fiercely and drove the Danes back. Olaf the Swedish king then attacked, but his men were also forced away. The hardest fighting came from Earl Erik. Unlike the others, he did not retreat after the first assault. He attacked the outer ships of Olaf's line, cleared them one by one, and cut them loose. Each time one ship was taken, he moved on to the next. Slowly, he worked his way toward the Long Serpent. The final fighting on the Long Serpent was brutal. Olaf's men defended the ship with great courage, but they were surrounded and outnumbered. Earl Eric's warriors boarded again and again until they finally gained the deck. As the battle was lost, Olaf Tryggvason disappeared. According to the saga, he leapt from the long serpent into the sea. Some believed he drowned, others claimed he escaped, but he was never seen again ruling in Norway. With Olaf gone, the victory belonged to Sweyn and his allies. After the battle, Norway was divided between the victors. Olaf the Swedish king received parts of the country. Earl Eric and his brother Earl Sweyn gained large regions to rule. Sweyn Forkbeard kept influence over Viken, the southeastern part of Norway, that had long been connected to Danish power. Through this settlement, Sweyn became the overlord of Norway, ruling indirectly through allied jarls rather than governing the whole country himself. The Battle of Svold was one of the most important victories of Sweyn's career. It removed Olaf Tryggvason, restored Danish influence in Norway, and placed much of the country under rulers loyal to Sweyn and his allies. Sweyn had now gone beyond being only the King of Denmark. Through victory at Svold, he became one of the dominant rulers of the north. Denmark was secure, Norway had been brought under his influence, and the path was open for even greater ambitions across the sea. The North Sea Empire was not yet complete, but after Svold, one of its foundations had been laid. The final and greatest stage of Sweyn Forkbeard's rise came in England. For many years, England had suffered from Danish raids. Under King Ethelred, the kingdom struggled to defend itself. Armies were raised, tribute was paid, and promises were made, but the attacks continued. The English crown seemed unable to bring lasting peace, and the weakness of Ethelred's rule gave Sweyn the opportunity he needed. In the year 1002, Ethelred made one of the most infamous decisions of his reign. On St. Brice's Day, he ordered the killing of Danes living in England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says this was done because the king had been told that the Danes planned to betray him, kill him and his councillors, and take the kingdom for themselves. It is unlikely that every Dane in England was killed. Many people of Danish blood lived in the Danelaw, and were too deeply rooted in English society for such a command to be carried out everywhere. Nevertheless, thousands of Danes were put to the sword. To Ethelred, this was an act of defence. To the Danes, it was murder. Later tradition claimed that among those killed was Gunhild, the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard. Whether every detail of that story is certain or not, the massacre gave Sweyn a powerful reason to return to England. It turned war into vengeance. It gave his invasion a cause that every warrior in his fleet could understand. In the year 1003, Sweyn came back. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that he brought his fleet to Exeter. The city was betrayed and taken, and the Danes carried away great wealth. From there, Sweyn's army moved across the south. They burned, plundered, and broke the strength of the English wherever they could. 1 year later, he came to Norwich and destroyed the town. Ufseitel, the leader of the East Anglians, tried to make peace, but the Danes soon broke the truce and marched on Thetford. Ufseitel gathered what forces he could and met them in battle. The fighting was hard, and many men died on both sides. The Chronicle says that the Danes themselves admitted they had never met worse fighting in England than what Ufseitel gave them. But even this resistance could not stop Sweyn for long. England was being worn down. The pattern repeated itself for years. Danish armies came and went. Towns were burned. Tribute was paid. English armies failed to trap the invaders or force a final victory. Ethelred remained king, but his authority was weakening. Every raid made him look less and less able to protect his people. Every payment of Danegeld made the next invasion more likely. By the year 1013, Sweyn was ready for conquest. This time he did not come only to raid. He came to take the kingdom. Before August of that year, Sweyn arrived at Sandwich with a great fleet. From there, he sailed around East Anglia and entered the Humber. He then moved up the River Trent until he reached Gainsborough. His campaign was fast, organised and decisive. The first to submit was Earl Uhtred of Northumbria. After him came the Northumbrians, the people of Lindsey, the 5 boroughs, and all the people north of Watling Street. They gave Sweyn hostages and accepted his authority. This was a turning point. The north and the old Danish regions of England had chosen Sweyn. Once he knew the north had submitted, Sweyn ordered his army to be supplied with food and horses. He then moved south, leaving his ships and the hostages in care of his son Cnut. This was an important moment in the rise of Cnut as well. The young prince was now part of his father's conquest, learning how England was won. Sweyn crossed Watling Street and brought his army into the heart of the kingdom. The chronicle says that his men did the greatest harm that any army could do. Oxford submitted, Winchester submitted, both towns gave hostages. Then Sweyn turned toward London. London was different. Ethelred was inside the city, and so was Thorkel the Tall, the great Danish warrior who had entered Ethelred's service. The people of London refused to surrender. Sweyn attacked, but the city held out. Some of his men drowned in the Thames during the assault, and he was forced to move away. But this did not save Ethelred. Sweyn marched west to Wallingford, and then to Bath. There, Ealdorman Ethelmar came to him with the western Thens. They submitted and gave hostages. With this, the West also accepted Sweyn's rule. The kingdom was collapsing around Ethelred. Once Sweyn had secured the West, he returned north to his ships. By then, the chronicle says that all the people accepted him as king. London, seeing that the rest of England had submitted and fearing destruction, finally gave in as well. Ethelred's rule was finished. The old king sent Queen Emma and their sons, Edward and Alfred, across the sea to Normandy. He himself first withdrew to the Isle of Wight, and then he also went into exile in Normandy. England, which had been ruled for generations by the House of Wessex, now belonged to Sweyn Forkbeard. Sweyn was crowned and accepted as the King of England in the year 1013. His reign in England was short, but its importance was enormous. He was already the King of Denmark. Since the fall of Olaf Tryggvason, he had also held power over Norway through allied jarls. Now he had taken England, the richest kingdom of the north. In one lifetime, Sweyn had risen from rebellion in Denmark to become the ruler of a northern empire. Emma Zirconium, written later in praise of Queen Emma and the Danish royal house, presents this conquest as the beginning of a great royal destiny. It says that Sweyn gained great worldly honour from the rule of the empire which he governed. Conveying the North Sea Empire began with him. Sweyn's triumph was not just victory of a Viking raider, it was the fall of an English king and the rise of a new order in the North Sea world. Denmark had been secured, Norway had been brought under his influence, England had now accepted him as king. For a brief moment, Sweyn Forkbeard stood above the 3 great powers of the northern seas. His rule did not last long, for he died at Gainsborough in February of the year 1014, only weeks after his final victory. But his conquest changed history. It proved that England could be taken by a Danish king, and it prepared the way for Cnut, who would return to build the empire his father had begun. Sweyn did not live long enough to fully enjoy the glory of his achievement. By the time of his death, the foundations of the North Sea Empire had been laid. When Sweyn Forkbeard died in the year 1014, his empire did not pass safely into the hands of his son. Cnut was still young. He had been left in England with the Danish fleet, and many of the men who submitted to Sweyn were now uncertain. The English nobles had accepted Sweyn as king, but they had not yet accepted Cnut. The old King Ethelred was still alive in Normandy, and many Englishmen now looked back to him, not because they loved him, but because he was the king they knew. The English councillors sent for Ethelred and offered to receive him again, but only if he would rule them better than before. It was a rare moment in English history. A king who had lost his throne was being called back, but not without conditions. Ethelred promised to be a better lord to his people, to forgive those who had turned against him, and to govern more justly. So Ethelred returned from exile. Cnut could not hold England alone. His father's conquest had been sudden and powerful, but it had not yet become secure. With Ethelred restored, Cnut was forced to leave. Before he sailed away, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records one last act of cruelty. The hostages who had been given to his father were brought to Sandwich, mutilated, and left behind. Their hands, ears, and noses were cut off. It was a brutal message. Cnut had been driven out, but he had not given up his claim. He would return. For a short time, Ethelred had his kingdom again, but England was still divided and weak. The king had promised reform, yet the old problems remained. The nobles distrusted one another. The country was exhausted by years of invasion. The north and the old Danish regions were still open to Cnut's influence. The House of Wessex had survived, but it had not recovered its strength. In the year 1015, Cnut came back. According to Emma Zirconium, Cnut returned to Denmark, gathered his strength, and prepared a new invasion. Thorkel the Tall, one of the greatest warriors of the age, came back to him and urged him to return to England. The Iconium describes Cnut's fleet as magnificent and terrifying, filled with armed men, bright shields, and ships decorated with gold and silver. The account is written to praise Cnut, but it shows how his return was remembered, not as a raid, but as the arrival of a king coming to claim what he believed was his inheritance. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle claims that Cnut came to Sandwich with a great fleet. From there, he sailed west and began his conquest again. Wessex submitted to him, and he took hostages from the people. Soon after, the powerful ealdorman Edric Striona, the Earl of Mercia, joined him with 40 ships. This was a serious blow to Ethelred. Edric had long been one of the most dangerous men in English politics. He was clever, ambitious, and untrustworthy. His decision to join Cnut showed that even among the English elite, faith in Ethelred was collapsing. While Cnut advanced, England fell into crisis. In the north, Edmund, Ethelred's son, had begun to act with increasing independence. In the year 1015, two leading thegns of the 5 boroughs, Sigurferth and Morcar, were murdered at Oxford. Morcar's widow, Ealdgith, was seized by King Ethelred and taken to Malmesbury. Edmund went there, took her against his father's will, and married her. He then rode north to Northumbria, where the people submitted to him. This was more than a marriage, it was a political move. Edmund was building his own power while his father still lived. He was becoming the man many Englishmen would look to when Ethelred could no longer defend the kingdom. Cnut and Edmund were now rising at the same time. Cnut was the son of Sweyn Forkbeard, heir to the Danish conquest of England. Edmund was the strongest surviving son of Ethelred, heir to the old royal house of Wessex. Between them stood a broken kingdom. In the year 1016, Ethelred died. He died on the 23rd of April, St. George's Day, after a long and troubled reign. Few English kings had faced such disaster. He had lost his kingdom once, returned from exile, and then watched Cnut invade again. His death left England divided. The people of London chose Edmund as king, while others submitted to Cnut. From that moment, the war became a contest between two young kings. Edmund earned the name Ironside because he fought with such force and endurance. He did not inherit a peaceful throne. He inherited a kingdom under attack, with enemies inside and outside its borders. Yet he did not collapse. He fought. Cnut first besieged London, but the city held out. London had remained loyal when many others had submitted, and its defence became one of the strongest points of Edmund's cause. Cnut tried to take the city by force, but it resisted him. Edmund then rode to Wessex and gathered support. The men of Wessex accepted him, and he raised an army against the Danes. The war moved quickly. The two sides met again and again, neither able to destroy the other at once. The first major fighting came at Penselwood. Edmund fought Cnut's forces there, and soon after they met again at Sherston. The battle at Sherston was hard and bloody, lasting for more than a day. The English and Danes both suffered losses, and neither side gained a final victory. And then came Brentford. Edmund fought near the city of London. The English won success there, but many of Edmund's own men drowned in the Thames because they had crossed too eagerly in search of plunder. Still, Edmund had shown that Cnut could be beaten. The struggle continued. Cnut remained dangerous, and Edmund had to keep raising armies from a tired country. The final great battle came at Assendon in October of the year 1016. There, Edmund gathered a large English army and faced Cnut in open battle. It should have been the moment when England was saved, but the old weakness returned. Edric Striona, who had already changed sides before, betrayed the English at the worst possible time. According to the tradition, he fled with his men and helped the battle turn against Edmund. The defeat at Assendon was devastating. Many of the greatest English nobles were killed. William of Malmesbury later wrote that on the field Cnut destroyed a kingdom, and that the flower of England withered there. It was remembered as the battle that broke the last great resistance to the Danish conquest. But Edmund survived. He escaped west and still tried to continue the war. Cnut pursued him into Gloucestershire. Both kings had fought hard. Both had lost men. Both knew that England could not endure an endless war. At this point, the sources begin to tell one of the most famous stories of the age. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives the simpler account. On advice of the gathered councillors, the two kings made peace. They became allies and sworn brothers. They confirmed the agreement with pledges and oaths. Edmund kept Wessex, while Cnut took Mercia and the northern part of England. That is the sober version, but later writers turned the meeting into something greater. In Emmeziconium, Edmund is said to have offered single combat to Cnut earlier in the war. Cnut, presented as wise and cautious, refused to fight at the wrong time. He said he would wait for a better moment, when battle would be fitting and victory more certain. The purpose of the story was to show that Cnut was not a coward, but a ruler who knew when to fight and when to wait. In Roger of Wendover's Flower of History, there is a chapter dedicated to the aftermath of Assendon and the legendary single combat between King Cnut and King Edmund that followed. It recounts, a few days after the tragic battle, in which so many noble warriors fell, King Edmund pursued Cnut, who was now ravaging Gloucestershire. The two kings therefore prepared to meet at the place near Deerhurst. Edmund positioned his army on the western side of the River Severn, while Cnut and his men gathered on the eastern bank, each king preparing himself for the impending clash. Just as the armies were about to engage, the treacherous Earl Edric called the chiefs together and addressed them with these words: "Noble warriors, why do we so foolishly risk our lives in battle for our kings? when our deaths do not secure the kingdom for them, nor bring an end to their insatiable ambition. My counsel is this: let those who are fighting for the kingdom do so alone. For what can be the greed for dominion when England, once sufficient for 8 kings, is now not enough for 2? Let them either come to terms, or settle the matter in single combat for the throne. This speech was met with approval by the gathered chiefs, and their decision was relayed to the 2 kings, who consented to the proposal. There is a small island called Osney, located at the mouth of the River Severn. The kings crossed over to this island, adorned in their finest armour, and began their fateful duel in the sights of both of their armies. They fought valiantly, parrying each other's spear thrusts with their strong shields, until both spears broke. Then, drawing their swords, they engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand battle, their swords ringing against their helmets with such force that sparks flew from the collision. Edmund's courage was evident as he fought with a fiery heart, his strength growing with each strike. He raised his right hand, wielding his sword with tremendous force, raining blow after blow upon Cnut's head, as if he were hurling lightning rather than striking with a sword. But as the battle wore on, Cnut began to feel his strength waning, and he realised he could not endure the onslaught much longer. Considering his options, he chose to attempt peace. However, knowing Edmund sought to kill him, Cnut, with cunning resolve, drew in a deep breath and charged at Edmund with renewed determination. He then suddenly pulled back, and in a voice filled with respect, called for a pause, requesting a moment of dialogue. Edmund, ever the courteous warrior, lowered his shield to the ground and listened attentively to Cnut, who spoke thus: "Until now, I have coveted your kingdom, bravest of men. But now, I find that I desire not only your kingdom, but your friendship above all. Denmark submits to me, Norway bows to my rule, and even the king of the Swedes has pledged allegiance. Fortune has favoured me in my lands, but it is your extraordinary valour that has won my heart. I would rather have you as a companion than conquer your kingdom. Let us rule together, you and I." Without hesitation, King Edmund, his heart moved by Cnut's words, graciously agreed to his offer. Thus the 2 kings decided to divide the kingdom between them. Edmund would control over the lands south of the River Thames, including Essex, East Anglia, and the city of London, the capital. Cnut would retain the northern regions. The 2 kings, having laid aside their splendid armour, embraced each other in front of their armies, their hearts united in peace. As a final symbol of their reconciliation, they exchanged their garments and weapons, each taking on the other's identity. Edmund became Cnut, and Cnut became Edmund. Whether the duel truly happened is uncertain. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle does not record it. The earliest and most reliable account only says that the kings met, made peace, and became sworn brothers, but the legend survived because it captured the meaning of the moment. Edmund and Cnut had fought each other across England, and neither had seemed willing to yield. The idea that they finally stood face to face, blade against blade, before choosing brotherhood over destruction, became one of the great stories of the Danish conquest. The peace that followed divided England. Edmund kept Wessex, Cnut took Mercia and the north. London made peace with the Danish army, and Cnut's men settled there for the winter. England now had 2 kings, one English, one Danish, bound by oath. But the settlement did not last. On the 30th of November in the year 1016, Edmund Ironside died. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says only that he died on St. Andrew's Day, and was buried with his grandfather Edgar at Glastonbury. Later stories gave darker explanations, but the Chronicle gives no details. What mattered was the result. When Edmund died, Cnut became king of all England. After Cnut became the king of England, his power was still not complete. He had won the richest kingdom in the north, but Denmark, the land of his fathers, was still not his. When Sweyn Forkbeard died in the year 1014, the Danish throne had not passed to Cnut, it passed to his brother Harold. When Sweyn died, his empire was divided by circumstance. The Danish army in England chose Cnut as king, but the English recalled Ethelred from exile and drove Cnut out. In Denmark, Harold, another son of Sweyn, became king. For several years, Cnut fought in England while Harold ruled the Danish homeland. The sources give only little detail about Harold's reign. He is one of the shadowy kings of the period. We know he was Sweyn's son, that he ruled Denmark after his father's death, and that his reign was short. He seems to have remained in Denmark while Cnut returned to England and continued the war against Ethelred and Edmund Ironside. Cnut's first kingdom therefore was England, not Denmark, but Denmark still mattered. In around the year 1018, Harold died. With his brother gone, Cnut became the heir to Denmark. The throne now passed to him, joining the kingdom of his fathers with the kingdom he had conquered by war. This was the moment when Cnut's rule became truly imperial. He was no longer only the king of England. He was king of England and Denmark together. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives a brief but important note for the year 1019. It says that King Cnut went to Denmark with 9 ships and stayed there through the winter. The Chronicle does not give a long explanation. It does not describe battles, ceremonies or speeches, but the meaning is clear. Cnut had to go to Denmark in person. He had to secure the kingdom, settle its affairs, and show himself to the Danish people as their king. After Cnut became the king of England and Denmark, one kingdom still stood outside his power. That kingdom was Norway. Norway was ruled by Olaf Haraldsson, later remembered as Saint Olaf. He was a strong king, but also a hard one. Like Olaf Tryggvason before him, he used force to strengthen Christianity and royal authority. He broke the power of many local chiefs, punished those who resisted him, and tried to make Norway obey one king. This made him powerful, but it also made him enemies. Many Norwegian chiefs had grown tired of Olaf's rule. Some had lost lands, some had lost influence, some feared his punishments. Others disliked how much authority he claimed over men who had once ruled over their own districts, almost like kings. Cnut understood this weakness. He did not begin by invading Norway with the sword alone. He began by winning men away from Olaf. According to the Heimskringla, Cnut sent gifts, promises, and messages into Norway. He offered wealth to the great men of the country. He promised honour to those who would support him. He gave hope to men who had suffered under Olaf or felt ignored by him. This was one of Cnut's greatest skills as a ruler. He knew that kingdoms were not only won by battles, they were also won by loyalty, silver, and patience. Olaf saw what was happening. He understood that Cnut's power was growing too strong. Cnut now had England behind him, with its wealth and ships. He had Denmark as his homeland and base. If he gained support inside Norway as well, Olaf would be surrounded. So Olaf made an alliance with Anund Jacob, the king of Sweden. Together, Olaf and the Swedish king moved against Cnut's power in Denmark. Their aim was to strike before Cnut could bring his full strength against Norway. This led to the Battle of the Holy River, known as Helga. The accounts of the battle differ. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that Cnut fought against a great force from Sweden, and that many Danish and Englishmen were lost. It even says that the Swedes held the field of battle. In that version, Cnut suffered heavily. The Heimskringla tells the story differently. It says that Olaf and Anund used cunning. They blocked the river and released the water against Cnut's fleet, destroying many ships and killing many men, but Cnut's main force survived. Olaf and Anund had won what they could, but they could not destroy Cnut. They withdrew rather than risk a greater battle. Even if Cnut suffered losses, his power was not broken. He still had England, he still had Denmark, he still had more wealth than his enemies. Olaf, on the other hand, was losing support inside Norway. After Helga, Cnut continued his work. He did not rush blindly into Norway. He waited until Olaf's position had grown weaker. More Norwegian chiefs turned against their king. Some were tired of his rule. Some had been bought by Cnut's gifts. Some believed Cnut would give them more freedom and honour than Olaf had allowed. By the year 1028, the moment had come. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that Cnut sailed from England to Norway with 50 ships, manned by English Thens. This is a powerful detail. Cnut was no longer only a Danish king using Danish warriors. He was now using the strength of England to conquer Norway. His empire was already beginning to act as one force. The Heimskringla gives the fuller northern account. Cnut sailed with a great army and moved along the coast of Norway. Olaf could not face him in open battle. Too many of the chiefs had turned away. Too many of the people were uncertain. Cnut's arrival did not look like a raid. It looked like the coming of a king who already had allies waiting for him. As Cnut moved through Norway, men submitted to him. He gave gifts. He confirmed men in their lands. He promised authority to those who joined him. Men who had once feared Olaf now saw a chance to rise under Cnut. Olaf Haraldsson was forced to flee. He left Norway and went east into exile, eventually finding refuge in Russia. His kingship had collapsed not because he lacked courage, but because too many of his own people had turned against him. Cnut had not only defeated him from outside, he had weakened his support from within. Cnut then sailed to Trondheim. There, according to the Heimskringla, he called a thing for the 8 districts of Trondelag. At this assembly, Cnut was chosen as the king of all Norway. This was the formal moment of his victory. The chiefs and people accepted him, and Norway passed under his rule. This was the true height of the North Sea Empire. Sweyn Forkbeard had begun the work. He had taken Denmark, broken Olaf Tryggvason at Svold, and conquered England before his death. But Cnut completed what his father had started. He held England, he inherited Denmark, then he brought Norway under his power. The North Sea Empire had reached its greatest size. England, Denmark and Norway now stood under one crown, and Cnut was the most powerful ruler in the northern world. Cnut's North Sea Empire was too large for one man to govern in person. It stretched across too many lands, with influence reaching into parts of Sweden and even the wider northern world. No king could sit in every hall, attend every assembly, or command every army by himself. Cnut understood this. His empire was built not only on conquest, but on delegation. He ruled through earls, jarls, family members, bishops, and trusted men who governed in his name. After he became the sole king of England in the year 1016, Cnut's first task was to secure the country. England had been torn apart by years of war. Many English nobles had died at Assendon, while others had changed sides more than once. Cnut could not simply trust the old political order, but he also could not rule England with Danes alone. He needed both peoples. He needed Danish warriors who had helped him win the kingdom, and English nobles who understood its lands, laws, and customs. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, in the year 1017, Cnut took the whole government of England and divided it into 4 great parts. Wessex he kept for himself. East Anglia he gave to Thorkel the Tall, Mercia he gave to Edric Striona, and Northumbria he gave to Eric Hakonsson. This division shows how Cnut governed in the first years of his reign. He placed powerful men over the main regions of England, but he kept Wessex under his own direct control. This was important. Wessex was the heartland of the Old English royal house. It included Winchester, one of the great royal centres of the kingdom. By keeping Wessex for himself, Cnut placed his own authority directly over the land from which the kings of Wessex had once ruled all England. East Anglia was given to Thorkel the Tall. Thorkel was one of the most famous warriors of the age. He had once fought against Ethelred, then served Ethelred, and later returned to Cnut. He was a Danish leader with great military authority, and Cnut trusted him enough to give him one of the key regions of England. East Anglia had deep Scandinavian connections, and placing Thorkel there made sense. He could command Danish loyalty while serving the new king. Mercia was given to Edric Striona. This was a dangerous choice, but also a practical one. Edric had betrayed both sides during the wars. He had joined Cnut, left him, returned to him, and played a dark role in English politics. But he was still powerful. He knew Mercia. He had influence there. For a short time, Cnut allowed him to remain useful, but Cnut did not allow him to remain dangerous for long. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Edric was put to death by Cnut in the year 1017. His death removed one of the most untrustworthy men in the kingdom. Northumbria was given to Erik Hakonsson, a powerful Norwegian jarl from the House of Lade. This was another careful decision. Northumbria was far from the south, and had long been difficult for English kings to control. It also had strong Scandinavian ties. By placing Erik there, Cnut used a man of northern power to govern a northern region. Erik had the background, reputation, and warrior following needing to hold it. Over time, Cnut's government in England changed. The first division of 1017 was not permanent in every detail. Some men rose, others fell. Thorkel was outlawed, but then he reconciled with Cnut. Edric was removed almost at once. Erik eventually disappears from the English political scene. In their place, new men came forward. The most important of them was Godwin. Godwin began as one of Edmund Ironside's supporters, and rose to become the Earl of Wessex. This was a major development. At first, Cnut had kept Wessex for himself, but he later trusted Godwin with the great earldom. Godwin became one of the strongest men in England. His rise shows how Cnut learned to rule not only as a conqueror, but as an English king. He did not rely forever on Danish commanders. He raised Englishmen who were loyal to him and made them pillars of his rule. Cnut also understood the importance of the church. He ruled as a Christian king and worked to present himself not as a pagan conqueror, but as a lawful ruler chosen by God. He supported churches, honoured saints, and made peace with the English clergy. This mattered greatly. The church gave his rule legitimacy. It helped bind Danes and English under one Christian kingship. Cnut's later pilgrimage to Rome and his letter to the English people show how carefully he wanted to be seen as a just Christian ruler, not merely as a warrior king. England became the richest and most stable part of his empire. It gave Cnut silver, ships, trained administrators, and royal prestige. Its system of shires, taxes, coinage, and written government was stronger than anything in Scandinavia. Cnut used this strength to support his wider rule. In many ways, England became the centre of the North Sea Empire. Denmark was different. It was Cnut's ancestral kingdom, but he could not remain there all the time. After the death of his brother Harold, Cnut became the king of Denmark, but he still spent much time of his reign in England. To govern Denmark, he relied on trusted men and family connections. One of the most important figures in Denmark was Ulf Jarl. Ulf was married to Cnut's sister Estrid, which made him part of the royal family. Cnut trusted him with great authority in Denmark, and Ulf also became connected to Cnut's young son Harthacnut. Harthacnut was the son of Cnut and Queen Emma, and Cnut clearly intended him to inherit Denmark. By placing Harthacnut in Denmark and leaving Ulf with power there, Cnut was trying to secure the Danish succession while he governed the wider empire. But this arrangement carried risk. A king who rules through powerful men must always watch them carefully. Ulf became too strong. Later tradition says that he helped have Harthacnut accepted as king in Denmark while Cnut was away, a move that could be seen either as protection of the royal heir or a challenge to Cnut's own authority. Soon enough, Cnut had Ulf killed. This showed that even family connection did not protect a man who threatened the king's power. Norway was harder to govern still. He placed Earl Hakon Eriksson in charge. Hakon's rule did not last long. After his death, Cnut placed his own son Sweyn over Norway, with Sweyn's mother Elfgifu of Northampton as a leading figure in the government. This was a more direct form of royal control. Instead of ruling through an old Norwegian jarl, Cnut now tried to rule Norway through his own family. This decision weakened his position. Sweyn was young, and Elfgifu was unpopular. The rule they brought to Norway was remembered harshly in later tradition. New laws, burdens, and foreign influence angered many Norwegians. The same chiefs who had once accepted Cnut because they disliked Olaf Haraldsson began to turn against Cnut's own regime. This showed the danger of the empire. Norway could be won by using local resentment, but it could not be held easily by foreign rule. Across the whole empire, Cnut's method was clear. In England, he ruled through great earls. In Denmark, he ruled through family, jarls, and royal authority over his homeland. In Norway, he first ruled through local chiefs and the Lade dynasty, and through his own son and Elfgifu. Each kingdom needed a different form of control. His own titles show the scale of his ambition. In his letter to the English people after his journey to Rome, Cnut called himself the King of all England, Denmark, Norway, and part of the Swedes. This was not the title of a small island king. It was the title of a ruler who wanted his subjects to understand that his power reached across the northern seas. For most of his reign, Cnut managed this system well. He removed dangerous men, promoted useful ones, married into English legitimacy through Emma, raised his sons in different parts of the empire, and kept the Great Sea routes under his control. He could move between kingdoms when needed, using the wealth of one land to secure another. This was the genius of Cnut's government. He did not rule the North Sea Empire like a single country. He ruled it like a network of kingdoms, bound together by ships, silver, oaths, family, and fear. Cnut's North Sea Empire had been built by war, inheritance, wealth, and careful rule. For a time it held together. England, Denmark, and Norway stood under one crown, and Cnut was the strongest ruler in the northern world. But the empire depended too much on him. It had been held together by his reputation, his judgment, and his ability to command loyalty across the sea. When he died, the whole structure began to weaken. Cnut died in England in the year 1035. The Heimskringla says he died on the 13th of November and was buried at Winchester. It also gives the scale of his reign. He had ruled Denmark for many years, England for nearly 2 decades, and Norway for 7 years. The empire had reached its height under him, but it did not pass safely to one heir. Instead, it began to divide between his sons. This was the great weakness of Cnut's achievement. He had more than one son, born of different mothers, and each had a claim to part of his inheritance.